Coming up, what issues face young Alaska natives? Holly Cook-Macaro gives us a Capitol update. And are you ready for some football? I'm Mark Trahant. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from Indian Country Today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. Say goodbye to one colonialist state. The Caribbean island of Barbados officially became a republic Monday night, replacing Britain's Queen Elizabeth II as its head of state. The nation celebrated its independence with a 21-gun salute and a parade featuring giant puppets. Several dignitaries attended the celebration held in a popular square, including the nation's president, Sandra Mason, and Prime Minister, Mia Mottley. Prince Charles flew to the island nation to attend as well. Music star Rihanna was declared a national hero at the event. She is seen as a worldwide ambassador for the nation where she was raised. The new independent republic status of Barbados means its island will end its allegiance to the British Crown. Barbados is an island of 300,000 people. It was home to Arawak and Kalinago people. The island is one of the wealthier nations in the Caribbean, largely dependent on tourism, manufacturing, and finance. Change also appears to be coming to Honduras. The headline of Honduran newspapers read, "Xiomara wins Civic Day." President-elect Xiomara Castro was elected to serve as the Honduran president, making her the first female president in the nation's history. Castro campaigned as a leftist opposition candidate. Her victory removed the conservative National Party from its 12-year power reign. Maria Luis Flores, a resident of Tegucigalpa, says she hopes Xiomara's tenure will benefit the youth.
There is no employment for the youth. When they graduate, they end up selling beans, rice, and lard in the streets. There is no point for them to graduate if there are no jobs for what they studied. We, the women, are always looking for change, especially for the youth. I admire that Xiomara and the Libre Party are always looking for change that will benefit the youth.
This is Castro's third run for president. She is the country's former First Lady. Reservation Dogs is in the winner's room for this year's Gotham Awards. On Monday, the hit series won for Breakthrough Series and Short Format. Seminole and Muskogee Creek citizen Sterling Harjo directed 3 of the 9-episode series and co-wrote the script. He says the win is a validation for the show and its representation of Native communities on screen.
I mean, it just validates us as being like a TV show that is like trying to, change something in the world and bring something to the conversation. And, we're here and we're bringing everything from our Native communities into the fold. And it's beautiful to be recognized by such a prestigious, organization in New York City.
Devry Jacobs plays one of the 4 Indigenous teens in rural Oklahoma, eyeing life in California. The Mohawk citizen echoed Sterling's thoughts and talked about the many Native nations represented in the cast and writers' room.
Each of us are representing our communities back home. All of us are from different nations and tribes, but all of us came together to represent Sterling's community, which is the Muskogee Creek and Seminole nations. And it just means so much to be recognized on such a prestigious level. And it just validates the fact that our stories are beautiful and we're really funny as hell.
Reservation Dogs was renewed for another season and is scheduled to air in 2022. A museum in Africa's Congo is working to preserve a disappearing indigenous culture. The Aka people have been living in the tropical forest for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And according to some experts, they are considered the first citizens of the Congo and its Central African Republic. But through the years, like many indigenous cultures, the Aka people's lifestyle has changed. Seeing the changes, an ethnologist who has been working with them since 1996 decided to take action and help preserve and spread their knowledge.
Le message, c'est surtout sur la...
The message is above all to value Aka culture, which is a rich culture, unfortunately little known. It is about the preservation of Aka culture, which is a wealth but unfortunately is in the process of disappearing, and especially the message related to the promotion of dialogue between cultures. It is the acceptance of the other with its differences.
The Aka's museum is free and open to the public, and they encourage all young people to visit. A furry problem that was ruling the Leech Lake Nation is getting under control in Minnesota. Stray dogs were a huge problem at one point. Sometimes they even stopped traffic, halting it on highways. Now Leech Lake says the strays are rare. The community has come together through setting up animal rescues and distribution for pet supplies. The town's first veterinary clinic, named Cass Lake, is close to breaking ground. Those who helped with the project say it was important to them because Ojibwe people value all living creatures. And those are the headlines for Indian Country Today. I'm Mark Trahant. Coming up, the Minnesota Vikings host the Indigenous Bowl, and politics with Holly Cook-Macaro. The best high school football players will gather in Minneapolis, Minnesota this weekend for the 4th Indigenous Bowl. It's an opportunity for young Native athletes to showcase their talent, work with coaches and mentors, and develop the skills necessary to move to the next level of competition. Colby Kicking Woman will be covering the action at US Bank Stadium, hosted by the Minnesota Vikings. Welcome, Colby.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me today.
So this is an amazing opportunity for young people. Tell us about it.
Yeah, an amazing opportunity is the perfect way to put it. As you said, this will be the 4th annual Indigenous Bowl. Last year's, of course, had to be canceled due to COVID, but the first game was played in 2017. More than 60 Native student athletes from across the country are going to take part in the game, and teams are going to be selected after the first or second day of practice. I believe today is the first day that everyone's going to start to arrive. One of the really exciting parts is that the 7G Foundation has partnered with the NFL and specifically the Minnesota Vikings. So this year's game is going to be played at US Bank Stadium. I don't know how familiar you are with the stadium, but it was built in, I believe, in 2015 or 2016. So it's, really young by stadium standards, state of the art. And so it's got to be really exciting for these Native student athletes to be able to play in a professional stadium and, a dream come true. It was also recently announced that the game is free and open to the public. So, I'd advise anybody in the Minneapolis area to definitely think about going and supporting these kids. Kickoff is at 10 a.m. and the game will likely be done before the 1 p.m. slate of NFL games. So for the football fanatics out there, you can get a full day of football.
That's exciting, and a free opportunity is always fun. How did this whole thing start?
Yeah, so it started in 2017, and the 7G Foundation, bills it as their premier event. Part of the organization's mission is to support the next 7 generation of Native leaders through education, athletics, and culture. And it's this week so much more about the game. The organization brings in a number of speakers, tribal leaders, former professional athletes, to speak with the kids, about college scholarship opportunities, personal finance, and kind of set them, to thinking about their path in life. I'm sure that kids will definitely pick the brains of the former professional athletes, on their path to the pros and life after the game.
And this is kind of a crazy thread, but in most communities, basketball is king. But if you go back a century ago, football was the big sport. So this is in a lot of ways returning to roots.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the like you said, basketball is the big love in Indian country, but Native athletes excel across the sports spectrum. Soccer, lacrosse, football, basketball, baseball, and so to have this opportunity to put film on tape and get in front of coaches and scouts is just really cool.
Well, I understand there's some stories you want to tell about some of the athletes, and particularly one from Blackfeet.
Yeah, of course. There's a couple kids from Browning that'll be there, and I imagine they'll be dominating. I'm just kidding. All jokes aside, every player that will be playing in the game is a standout player. These are Indian country's elite student athletes, and a lot of these kids come from small schools, and so they likely play both offense and defense already. And so that's something that I'll be keeping an eye on. The more you're on the field, the more opportunity you have to make a big play. And one of the things I'm interested in talking to the kids about is touchdown celebrations. Especially since they'll be playing in the professional stadium. I think that'll be a lot of fun. But of course, we'll have a better feel for who's who once we're on the ground. So be sure to tune into our coverage on IndianCountry.com. It's going to be a lot of fun.
This will be fun. Thank you so much, Colby.
I appreciate it, Mark.
It's been 50 years since Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, also known as ANCSA. The law set up a different type of enrollment for Alaska Natives. Under ANCSA, if you were born before December 18, 1971, you qualify as an initial shareholder for an Alaska Native corporation. Unfortunately, that meant if you had brothers or sisters born after that date, they were not quite the same as shareholders. Today, as more generations are born, the question becomes, who can be a shareholder and how can this younger generation help shape the future? We have a partnership with Alaska Public Media to cover this complex story. Our special correspondent, Megan Sullivan, brings us this story about identity among Alaska Natives.
Alyssa London has always felt most at home with her Tlingit community.
I am a proud Tlingit woman who grew up with her family telling her who she is and where she comes from.
London knows her culture's past and lives out the values and traditions daily. It's the future she has questions about.
So I would like future generations to not have to defend their identity as much and to just be able to be raised with that sense of who they are and to just be able to continue to walk in the footsteps of their parents and grandparents and uphold that legacy.
This is a historic moment for the Native of Alaska.
When the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act passed into law, it established 12 corporations. Those who are at least 1/4 Alaska Native and born before December 18, 1971, were eligible to receive 100 shares in their corporation. So now, corporations are faced with a big decision. Open up enrollment to descendants born after the initial date, or stick with original shareholders only.
Anytime you have a policy that says you get this and you don't, it creates divide.
Corporations will also have to decide whether to allow descendants who are less than 1/4 Alaska Native to enroll.
If we continue to use blood quantum as a measure of how Native we are, there is a time in the future where there will no longer be Native people.
Ayu Kasatak, who's a Nupiaq, was born after the ANCSA deadline, meaning she couldn't enroll in her regional or village corporation. But last summer, her mom gave her a small number of shares. That means she can further contribute to her home region through her voting rights as a shareholder.
It really lit a fire within me to ensure that these corporations and organizations that represent Alaska Native people are inclusive of our Native people.
Alaska Native shareholders can't sell their shares, but they can pass them on in their wills or gift them to others. Some argue that the setup is fair because it doesn't dilute the worth of the shares. Others believe it is unreliable. Descendants might not get any shares or have enough to pass down to their children. Now a mom herself, Ayu is thinking ahead to how enrollment policies might impact future generations of Alaska Natives.
The much bigger picture is what are we setting up for the future of these corporations if we are not including our people. 100 years from now, when the original shareholders of ANCSA are no longer with us, who will be the decision makers in our corporations? Who will have the votes?
6 out of 12 regional corporations have opened up enrollment to descendants of the original shareholders. In 2015, Chilista shareholders voted to open enrollment to descendants and remove blood quantum requirements. Their shareholder base has since grown from 13,000 to over 34,000.
We're very much about sharing in our community, helping others. Part of that was Chilista shareholders feeling that they wanted to share in the ability to enroll as a shareholder.
Chilista's communication director, Tom Leonard, was born 2 months before the ANCSA deadline, meaning he could enroll while his younger siblings couldn't. Once separated by an arbitrary date, his whole family is now able to be a part of the corporation.
Being able to provide and support those opportunities for the next generation is important.
Alex Lacey is one of those new shareholders. Lacey is part of Hooper-based tribe where her family is from. She lives in Anchorage and was able to enroll in Chilista as a descendant around a year ago.
So this is a picture of me and my grandma, and I'm considered the descendant of her, so she's the reason why I'm enrolled in Chilista.
While Lacey feels closer to her tribe, she values the educational and professional opportunities that her corporation provides.
They do, finance my school. I do get dividends. There's a lot of opportunities that are available to me from being a descendant from that region that I'm grateful for.
Shareholders will ultimately determine what happens to the corporations and the traditional lands they oversee.
In order for the lands to be in good hands in the future, in order for the corporations to be run well, that there needs to be more involvement of younger generations, either in board settings or in leadership development roles.
London's excited to help shape what the next 50 years of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act will look like, alongside the new perspectives and dynamic thinking of other young Alaska Native shareholders. For Indian Country Today and Alaska Public Media, I'm Megan Sullivan.
Megan Sullivan has a series of reports on ANCSA. It's on our website. You can read her stories there. When we come back, trust lands and the Department of Interior. Holly Cook-Macaro joins us for Washington Updates. The Secretary of Interior has enormous authority over lands in the western United States, and Holly Cook-Macaro is here to talk to us about that. She's a partner with Spirit Rock Consulting and is a regular contributor to our news program. Welcome, Holly.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see you.
I want to start with Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland using enormous authority to basically change the landscape, both at Chaco Canyon, but even broader.
Yes, and as we talk about Chaco Canyon, this is being watched not just for the impacts on Chaco Canyon, which are important, and I'll talk through, but because of everything that's in front of the administration. Now, if Indian Country has had a chance to follow Secretary Haaland as she made the visit, as she made the announcement during the White House Tribal Nations Summit about the protections. There is going to be a withdrawal in a 10-mile radius of the federal land surrounding Chaco Canyon. That withdrawal would ban any new oil and gas leasing on those federal lands in that area. There are other allotments, tribal lands, etc., within that area as well. So that ban would only apply to the federal lands. But this is also being watched because of everything that is in front of Secretary Haaland as the lead on these things at the Department of Interior and for the administration, and what her actions will be, what the considerations will be. And as we've watched the voices of the administration who had gone to Glasgow and participated in the global climate conference there, and really articulated, made commitments on behalf of the United States about what our goals would be as a nation in terms of climate change and addressing the climate crisis. We have lurking out there the leasing ban. We have the protection of tribal sacred sites, and then we have also along with that, and this was also announced at the White House Tribal Nations Summit, is the efforts for co-management with tribes on these federal lands, really recognizing tribal sacred sites, tribal authority, tribal knowledge, and finding paths forward for tribes to co-manage and provide protection for these sites.
When you think of the history of the Interior Secretary, so many Western politicians took that job because it was basically the Bureau of Mining and Ranching. And now to have it shift and to be, here are the national policy goals with climate change, and here's someone who's going to change the landscape and get some of these things done.
It's extraordinary. And once again, you know, I've thought back over the last just over a year since Secretary Haaland has been the Secretary of Interior. Each time I see her filling that space, and this goes to your question, you know, fully inhabiting that space as a Native person, and both in substance and personally, I think. And so, you know, that sort of representation is important. But as you've noted, we've had Ryan Zinke, we've had so much Western representation of oil and gas interests, of ranching interests, of interests that were most of the time at odds with the interests of the tribes in those regions. And so when we see the consideration of new oil and gas leases, many of those are in Western states, those are in the heartland of Indian country in the West. So the irony is great. I know there is some heartburn for those in the climate community about the consideration of new oil and gas leasing. And that really is an example of what we are seeing is the conflict that Secretary Haaland is dealing with, the deep, deep presence of oil and gas interests on these lands. But also we now have someone in that seat who has a deep knowledge, unprecedented level of knowledge about what those lands mean, what they encompass, what they possess and represent to the indigenous people, the tribes of that region. We have that knowledge alongside the interests of oil and gas as well. And while I know it can be frustrating when things don't go all one way in support of say our climate goals, we actually are seeing, I think, a much better input, much better perspective in these policies that are coming out of the Biden administration as a result of Secretary Haaland's deep knowledge.
Well, and this is really fascinating because in a way, because the secretary has been just so effective, had she gone to the direction of saying yes to everything that we care about on the climate, she probably would be out of office or be ineffective. It's that balance that makes her so effective.
Exactly. And we look back to what her record was in the House as a member of Congress. She had the most bipartisan record in her class of members that came in of anyone else. And that was a reflection of her ability to find middle ground, to find that balance that you know.
I want to quickly switch. We only have about a minute and a half left, but I want to talk about what's going on Capitol Hill.
Yes, there is a lot going on Capitol Hill. Again, I have to imagine that, like the rest of America, Indian country is trying to keep track of. So we've got infrastructure out the door. We've got the administration, including Secretary Haaland, out spread out across the country promoting that. We also have the Build Back Better plan, which contains a significant number of resources for Indian country, which is pending in the Senate. But what we are facing immediately right now is a government shutdown on Friday. And they had high hopes of moving what we call a CR, short for a continuing resolution. And what it does is just continue appropriations to a date certain and gives the House and Senate time to negotiate the new numbers for the coming fiscal year. So that CR is pending. We had a new twist in the last 24 hours of the House GOP conference and some in the Senate that intend to use this continuing resolution to defund the vaccine mandate of the Biden administration. So as we speak, that's being worked out. So you can watch all the headline news for that as well. What we won't see in the news is that the several tribal bills that are what's called the suspension calendar in the House today. Importantly, what is known as the Carcieri Fix, introduced by Congresswoman Betty McCollum, along with Congressman Tom Cole, Betty McCollum from Minnesota, Tom Cole from Oklahoma. That bill has been tweaked. It is the language that the Biden administration is supporting, that they included in what they sent to the Hill. We had, I think, 8 Democrats who didn't vote for it last time. I think with some pressure from the Biden administration that will change. So we don't expect any problems there. And we do have a fair number of Republicans who will be voting in favor as well. So I do expect that bill to pass on suspension in the House. It requires a 2/3 vote. That said, it still faces a number of hurdles in the Senate.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Holly Cook-Macaro.
Yes, good to see you, Mark.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the latest news, go to IndianCountryToday.com. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This is Indian Country Today.